20 years from now, if you're around and you're writing about what actually did happen, looking back, what's that history going to be?
So I think the worst case scenario is this, and was outlined or alluded to actually in the Washington Post by three retired senior generals. This is an op-ed that should have been read by everybody and wasn't. And they came in and they said, what those of us who have done reporting on the military know, it is not nearly as monolithic as people understand. There's a reason that General Milley on January 6th said, hey, take orders from me. Essentially, as I understand it, kind of that's borderline mutiny, right?
Right.
He's saying,
Trump
don't
standing
take
there with his, like Trump standing there with the Bible. And before it happened on January 6th, remember that thing where he's standing with the Bible? Police are running by, they're tear gassing, pepper spraying people. And then there's somebody at the Pentagon starts rumbling and saying, we're not part of this. And then January 6th, it sort of happens.
But more. Some are. And the military is not monolithic. And people like General Michael Flynn, who's sort of a crazy QAnon figure now, those folks have always been there, but they have been contained by the institution. So maybe they're just good at doing logistics, or maybe they're just put on a turkey farm somewhere. We have the worst case scenario is a real dispute in the chain of command. And I think that is a distinct possibility in 2024. Do we imagine that there's any way that election is not contested? And if we have even a couple base commanders that say, no, I don't think Biden or whoever else is president, I think Trump is president, so I'm not following their orders. We've already seen simmering elements of that.
Well, there's Oath Keepers has sworn to do that.
Oath Keepers is small. Oath Keepers, I'm
saying that template is there.
No. The template's there on a much bigger scale. 7 state National Guard commanders, mild mutiny, refused to enforce orders on vaccines. Right. So Biden faced a choice. What do I do? Do I make a big showdown, or do I? And sometimes the right thing to do is that to pull off. So the worst case scenario is a split in the military. Military leaders are warning us it is possible. That's the real war. Right. So that's the worst case scenario. Second worst scenario is maybe Northern Ireland, a long period of the Troubles, the simmering civil war that we're already in, the casualties that we're already seeing, but on a much bigger scale. I think
you see the beginning of it with people shooting up power exchange stations to take, all that stuff, not to mention the killings, but there's a lot of little things going on which are happening.
There are and the pregnant people who are bleeding out for lack of reproductive rights. Those are casualties of the slow civil war. The 20 states in which my child is now to some degree criminalized. The trans kids who are committing suicide in despair. Those are casualties of the slow civil war. The men with AR-15s who line up in front of schools and hospitals and libraries every weekend in shows of force. That's part of the slow civil war. And then the institutionalized violence. When Greg Abbott pardons a just convicted killer, he is now an accessory to the crime in my book, right? This is when the Tennessee legislature achieves the same goals as January 6th insurrectionists, but the call is coming from inside. It's institutionalized violence. This could heat up. And that's where the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys matter. I do not believe, and I think people reassure themselves, wait till these militias get a load of an F-16. You're right. Militia versus the U.S. military, it's not a question.
Right.
But militia committing acts of terror all over the country, we're already there, and it can get worse. Now, but the third scenario,
not to mention the fact that on January 6th, you did have some active duty people and retired military people who were part of that crazy unwashed mob.
Yeah.
But they're and they represent a lot of other folks. So yeah, go ahead.
But the third scenario is this. The third scenario is, I think the central lie of fascism is an inevitability, right? That this is coming. And it's despair. The book in some ways is about grief. I think grief unprocessed curdles into rage. I think there's a great deal of grief in the country now. The pandemic, the loss of some of what we believed about democracy. And I mean, this is no defense of white grievances. They're people who lost a privilege they thought they were entitled to. That's still lost. Process that grief. Mourn what you did not understand. When we don't mourn, and we haven't mourned our pandemic dead, we haven't mourned, we're not mourning climate crisis. We call it climate crisis. It's not a crisis. A crisis suggests there's a resolution, as if either we'll all burn up or maybe the glaciers will come back. We might not all burn up, but the glaciers aren't coming back. This is the condition that we live in. We mourn the loss and then figure out how to keep going. So my third scenario is that we begin to mourn, that's part of the organizing, part of the work of democracy, of building something beautiful. I try to, the book is bookended with what I think of as these hope notes, these old singers who are forgotten. Harry Belafonte, what's he doing in a book about Trump?
Yeah, I like that Belafonte part.
Yeah, because he's got the diagnosis of the white supremacy that feeds everything in this country, but also because he's long in the struggle. And that's why I reject the language of crisis, because the struggle is long.